Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics. I found this original Xbox at a thrift shop, and it came with the Xbox itself, a really short power cord. It's about 2 feet long, and I don't think that's original, but it does fit. And most importantly, the proprietary AV cable, which can usually cost you more than the Xbox itself. But it was tagged at $10. Seemed like a good deal, until of course I went and I plugged it in, hit the power button, and nothing happened. It won't power up. But I was still intrigued, and it is a thrift shop after all, so you're doing a good deed by buying something there, so I figured I'd do my good deed. But I was kind of intrigued. I haven't been inside an original Xbox for quite some time, and it would be neat to see if we can get this guy up and running again. So this is what I call a virgin Xbox, and by that I mean it looks like it has never been opened. Now that's both good and bad. I mean, the good thing is nobody's opened this, so nobody's mucked around in there and used the cattle prod to change components. But the bad part is that this is unmodified, so it doesn't have a mod chip in it or anything like that, because that would obviously be indicated by it having been opened. Now, how do I know that? And I'll tell you. There are 4 screws underneath these rubber feet, and you basically pry off the rubber feet and remove them, and that could have happened. There's no way of telling. But there are 2 more screws hidden under the stickers. The first one is over here. You can kind of feel it. And these are foil stickers, so if you try to remove the sticker and then take out the screw, you cannot remove these stickers because they'll tear apart when you're trying to lift them. And there's also a second screw right here. Don't know if you can see that, but there's a screw here and a screw here, and if it was ever opened, you would see a hole in here, or you would see the sticker partially ripped off. So we're going to have to, of course, put a hole in here to get those screws out, but let's go ahead and see if we can remove the case. I went ahead and pried off the rubber feet, and basically, I'll show you one. I'm just sticking a knife in there, lifting them off. They're self-stick, so I don't know if they're going to stay in place when I replace them, but they reveal a T15 torque screw each. And I also went ahead and cut holes into the stickers. So instead of just sticking a screwdriver in there and ripping the shit out of the sticker, I thought I'd take a sharp knife and cut out the outline of it. And so these also reveal 2 T15 screws. So now we can remove those screws. But first let's have a look at the serial number and try to date this unit. So if we look at the serial number sticker, it says manufacturing date 2004-03-22, which I think means March 22nd, 2004. But the serial number right underneath it tells us a little bit differently about the date. Now, there's sites on the internet that tell you how to interpret these codes, but the serial number seems to, I mean, it does verify that it was built in 2004, but and that's the 4 in the second group of numbers in the serial number, but the 13 indicates that it was made in the 13th week, and well, we know that it was made early to middle 2004, and the 05 at the very end indicates that it was manufactured in China. And what the date and the China manufacturing date mean is that this most likely contains a motherboard of version 1.2 through 1.5, and in order to exactly determine the motherboard version, we're going to have to look at the graphics chip inside, and that will give us final resolution on the version number. So I removed most of the screws, just using a T15 screwdriver. You can see these are some manly screws. But let's put these in a safe place and see if we can get the top off. And the case does seem to come apart. Did I forget something in here? Nope. There you go. And there's the inside. Looks nice and clean. The grubbiness from the outside has not made its way in. So let's set that aside and have a look here. So we have a the hard drive on the left, and that hard drive, let's see what it says. Blah 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 blah. And I guess I'd have to convert the LBA to figure out what the size of this is. But it doesn't tell me with the size of it. It's a Seagate model ST310014 ACE. And it's an IDE drive. But if we get this thing to power up, we'll know. I mean, I could probably look this up online, but let's start getting, I mean, the motherboard's underneath all of this, so I'm going to have to take out the drive and the CD-ROM. Let's get started with the hard drive. So we'll remove this from its little holding tab there. Remove the IDE cable. Remove the power cable and remove it from the channel here. Actually, then we can see there's two T10 screws here. That one comes out easy, and that one is completely hidden in there, but this thing isn't magnetic at all, so it won't come out. So in order to overcome that, we'll get this magnetic pointer which doesn't fit far enough. So, well, at least we got one of them out. In order to get out the other one, let me fetch a pair of tweezers and see if I can grab the screw with that. And I keep grabbing it and it keeps falling back, but here you go. Just doesn't want to stay. So this means now that the hard drive assembly should pop out, and it does, revealing part of the motherboard. Bit dusty in there, but we'll get that cleaned up. And next we have to take out the CD-ROM, and And for the CD-ROM, I can see a T10 screw buried in here. And that didn't work. So let's keep trying. Doesn't want to come out. Let's see if I just... And there you go. So does that mean this whole thing lifts out now? Or is there another screw in here? Oh, I can't see another screw. So without boring you to death, let me play around with it for a bit and see if I can get that thing to come out. I fiddled around a bit with this thing and it did finally come out. Of course, we'll set it aside. We had to remove the IDE cable and the power cable. And now we have full access to the inside. As you can see, it's pretty dusty. Looking around a bit, first thing I see is there's a fuse in here. So we're going to go ahead and measure that. Most everything looks okay, except I can see 3 caps with bulging tops. And this one, and this one. And you might not be able to see it, but yes, they're bulging pretty good. So I'm going to have to remove these, well, replace these and see if they leaked anything. But first, let's go in and see if we can get really lucky here and see if the fuse has decided to blow. Nope, the fuse is good. So we're going to have to do some tests to see if the power supply board down here is generating any voltages, and then kind of start following up on that. So the first order of business was to get out the motherboard. The motherboard came out by removing, there were 10 screws, T10 screws holding it in place. And there was a power supply connector and assorted other connectors here, the front panel, the fan, that I unplugged, and after removing those, the motherboard came out rather easily. So I figured, let's go in and just do a simple continuity check on those capacitors that were bulged. So the first one is over here, and it charges up. The second one is over here, and that one's showing a dead short. So that's a good thing. I mean, for troubleshooting purposes, of course. And this one charges up kind of slowly, but when it hits about 70 ohms, the beep turns off. And so it looks like this one may be shorted. Now, just for completeness, let's switch to capacitance. Those are 2200s or 3300s marked. And it just keeps saying overload, overload, overload. So those three caps need to be pulled. So let's go ahead and pull them and measure them out of circuit and see what they have to say when they've been taken out. So first off, that measurement that yielded a dead short was my fault. I measured the wrong terminals. I basically measured ground to ground, so that's why. But I took all the bulging ones out and two extra ones because they're the exact same make and values as the three that were bulging. And I think if those three were bulging, the other two weren't far behind, so I took them all out anyway. I replaced them with identically spec'd Nichicon caps over here. Caps are physically a bit bigger, but they're exact replacements. And I thought it'd be interesting to measure some of these caps that I took out and see what the SR meter has to say, because obviously the multimeter can't measure that high. So it's showing a good ESR, and they're supposed to be 3300, so this particular one dropped in value, but it's not really reading bad. So one more maybe to see what this one has to say. And this one has a good ESR, and instead of 3300 measures almost 4500, so they're a little bit out of range as far as the capacitance is concerned, but I'm not exactly sure if they're far enough out of range to cause the motherboard not to boot. So let's do a simple test without putting the whole thing back together, but rather just putting it back in the case and connecting the power supply and seeing if it turns on, which we can observe by watching the fan spin. So I put the motherboard back in, hooked up the essentials, and I also hooked up the video cable to see if it has anything to tell us. It's obviously going to error out because there's no hard drive or no DVD drive in here, but sorry, that's not a DVD drive, that's a CD drive. But since nothing's in there, let's just say if it comes on now. We got power, we got pretty much everything. The fan spins. Oh, and it boots up. So even though the capacitors electrically looked out of range, but physically looked bad, I guess whatever was happening in there was preventing it from powering on. So it's on, the fan is running, but of course it's trying the hard drive, and then it tells you service required, call customer support, and that usually happens if it is unable to read the hard disk. And we're seeing the red ring of death over here, which says I can't work. So what we got to do is put it all back together, but one other thing needs to be done on the motherboard now that we can see it work, and I'll tell you in a minute what that is. The remaining task I'm talking about is these machines are over 10 years old, so the heat transfer paste on the CPU and the GPU are probably solidified by now. Now I've finagled open the clips, and this one, the CPU heatsink, comes off, and we can see the leftovers here. However, I removed the clip from the GPU, and that one's frozen solid, and that's again to be expected because it gets really hot, and I guess the transfer paste turns to glue. So what I want to do is put the heatsinks back on and power it up and let it run for a few minutes, and maybe the heat from the GPU will loosen this heatsink over here. Now remember, never run these without the heatsinks in place, because the chips will almost immediately self-destruct. So in my experience, alcohol isopropyl does not work very well to remove the paste, so I have some acetone in here, and we can see that the acetone removes it pretty well, as you can see from the edges. Same thing on the processor, on the GPU, but it's going to take several passes to get this off. So I'll be back when it's clean. Took several passes to get the gunk off, but finally everything came off. You can clearly see the chips, and the heatsink for the GPU and for the CPU are completely clean. When you're cleaning these, don't use any sharp-edged instruments, because what you're going to do is nick the aluminum surface, and that's going to negatively affect heat transfer. You want things to be as flat as possible. So now the next thing we do is we put some heatsink compound on there. What a shame, we just cleaned it, right? Anyway, on this one, if there's anything left in here, put a dab right in the middle. It's probably a bit too much, but rather more is a little better than less. And for the GPU, put one in the middle and distribute some more around it. Probably also a bit too much, but again, as I said, better more than less. The next thing we do is we take the heat sinks, put them in place, and push down on them for a while. What I do is I put something heavy like a transformer on top of it, and what that'll do is it'll evenly distribute the paste and hopefully get rid of any air bubbles in there at the same time. So we'll let this sit just for a short while, which should put it in place, and then we'll put the clip on. So that's enough. That is in place. Now for the CPU. Yep, it distributes nicely. And we do the exact same thing here. We'll put that in place and put a weight on it. So that kind of distributes itself on there. You also want to check the fins on the heat sinks. If you bent any of them while removing the heat sinks, you want to make sure you bent them back in place so you get full heatsink operation out of these things. So we'll let it sit for a little longer, and then I'll put the clips back in place, and then we can start reassembling the machine. Here's what it looks like with the motherboard reinstalled. No drives yet, but we have the heat sinks in place. We have all of the screws in place, and we plugged in the stuff that connects to the case. Controllers 1 and 2, front buttons and controllers 3 and 4, and of course the power supply itself. And again, before putting in the drives, let's just do a quick sanity test here. And you can hear it going through the motions. It comes up. We have a video display. So, okay. Let's put it all back. Let's put the drives back in and put an actual game disc in there. Looks like I may have misspoken. Not may have, but I actually did misspeak. I initially called this a DVD drive, then I reversed myself and called it a CD drive, but I don't know what I was thinking. I was probably thinking I was working on a PlayStation 1. This is in fact a DVD drive, and in order to test it as a DVD drive, for a movie DVD drive, I can't do that. I'm missing the remote and the remote receiver for DVD playback. But what we can do is put a game in and see if the game comes up. So one more thing we're going to need here is a controller, which looks like this. And so let's boot it up. So it booted off of the hard drive. We're not getting any error messages. So the hard drive's good. And finally, let's put in a game. An oldie but goodie. It's Half-Life 2. But let's see if it recognizes the disc. And if we can actually play a game on it. So when it stops blinking, that's usually a good sign. That means it recognized the disc. And there you go. Valve comes up. And so on and so forth. Can we button through any of this? No, of course not. But looks like the repair was successful. Have a fully working Xbox here. So let me put the top back on, and then we can end. And with that, we will end this episode. So here's the final result. Let's give it a final test by trying to load a different game. And while we're waiting for that, closing the words on this, it came back together nicely. Needs a little bit more cleanup, the nooks and crannies. I mean, they always put these structures on here that love to collect dust, but I guess that's the way it is. Reading through the documentation, there's one more thing people recommend, and that is there's a supercapacitor in here, a 1 farad, not microfarad, but 1 farad capacitor, which maintains power to the real-time clock. And I guess they have a high occurrence of going bad. However, I observed the one in here. The clock seems to work. There was no bulging on the cap, no leakage or anything like that. And I didn't happen to have a 1 farad capacitor lying around, so I left it in. And I'll put that on my to-do list the next time. I buy parts, I'll probably buy some of the supercapacitors and replace the one in here, even though it looked just fine. But there are several reports of it misbehaving, and so that's something you may want to consider doing when you're fixing up an Xbox. So here you go. This is not it's fixed. It's not exactly a highly desirable machine, but you know, just wait. In another 5 or 10 years, this is going to be the first game system that Microsoft built, and people are going to be asking gazillions of dollars for it. So I'll put this into my retirement account or retirement fund closet or box or whatever, and in a few years I'll sell it on eBay and I'll be rich. Thanks for watching. Please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. But I hope you liked what you saw, and the next time you come across one of these at a thrift shop or wherever and it's cheap, go ahead and pick it up, because obviously this guide will help you to fix it. And if you have a completely different problem, there is a lot of documentation on the internet about these, because there are a lot of them out there, and people have addressed a lot of ways to fix these. Have a good one, and see you later.